I'm not a great talker to a live audience, I must admit. I haven't been on radio for 30 odd years now, and I was used to broadcasting from a small box and a microphone, and I couldn't see my audience, and so I was not nervous or shy. But today I'm facing the public.
Great job.
I'm trying very hard to do my best, and I hope it entertains you today. I don't know what to talk about. Do I talk about how I first started in radio? Well, it wasn't my intention to work on pirate radio at all. I was studying as a radio officer for a seismic research company, a Canadian company, who were based in Den Helder in northern Holland. And I was going to Holland for an interview for a job. And I got as far as Den Haag, and some of my friends, Graham Gill and other people, Andy Archer, were working on Radio Caroline. And I had to say hello to them. So I went out to the radio ship and I met everybody. And it turned out that they asked me to stay on board to do some work to assist them. And I said, well, okay, I've got an interview with this company in 4 days' time. I can't stay very long. I ended up staying 6 weeks, which is a very long time without any money, very little food. And so that changed my life completely. I stayed with Radio Caroline for 1.5 years. And then I went home to my family, and they told me that I looked very bad, that I looked very ill, that I must finish with this crazy life, you know. So I promised my father on that day that I would not go back to working on a ship. And we shook hands and we had a beer, and that was it. Then about 10 minutes later, the phone rang, the telephone rang. Excuse me, it was Brian Mackenzie from Radio North Sea. We're looking for an engineer and a voice. Would you like to join us? I said, is there any money in this, any geld? And he said, yes, we can pay you, we can pay you. Oh, thank you. I can pay my debts to my father now, I can pay everybody, you know. And so I stayed with Radio North Sea for, I guess it was 1.5 years more, until it closed down in 1974. It didn't end there, of course, as many of you know. The ship was sold to Colonel Gaddafi in Libya. Not initially, it was actually contracted to go to Italy to broadcast off the Italian coast as Radio Nova International. But unfortunately, what nobody realized was the sea, the depth of the water off the Italian coast was very, very deep. We couldn't anchor a ship at this position. And so that was the end of that. In the meantime, the British government had word that we were going to broadcast off the English coast again. And so they were going to make sure that this would never happen again. And so the Dutch police arrived at the ship when we were in Slikkerveer in Holland and seized the ship. And we were all under arrest. And so that was the end of this process. So after that, I needed to find some work. So I went to Israel, to the Voice of Peace, and I did 6 months for them. After that, maybe 1 year passed by, and I had a telephone call from MEBO, Meister and Bollier. We're going to Libya. I thought, I'm a little afraid of this. This sounds a bit scary. But I'm very glad that I did, because when I went to Libya, I found the people were fantastic. The stories, the rumours were not as we were told. It was a very peaceful country. And so I stayed with the Libyan government, working for them for about maybe 5 years. And that was now 20 years ago. And even today, I go working for the Libyan broadcasting from time to time. So I've had a very nice life, and thanks to, well, Graham Gill, I guess, really, because it was Graham who recommended me to go to Radio North Sea, and we've been friends for all those years. So I'm very grateful for a fantastic life, very exciting. I've been working as an engineer since. I stopped working as a radio voice. I felt that it was a job for young people, and so when I was 25 years old, I quit my on-air work, but I stayed with the engineering, and I'm still a broadcast engineer today, a freelance engineer. Yeah, most of my work has been in Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, but predominantly North Africa in the Sahara Desert, installing radio and TV stations. For the last 25 years. I've also worked in Central America, in Costa Rica, for the Spanish National Radio. We installed big shortwave transmitters, 100 kilowatts installation. I've worked in the Gulf as well for Iraqi jamming. We've been very busy. I stayed with Bollier and Meister for about 10 years. Unfortunately, in recent years, they haven't been involved in broadcasting, as you know, in other things. Which I'm not interested in. I don't want to get involved with those things. I'm a broadcaster, so I wish to stay in broadcasting if possible.
In 1975, when the MEBO went into Slikkerveer, and you said you have been arrested, it means really not you or the crew personally, but the ship has been got a bail and was blocked for further work, or mainly for going out. You were still on the ship and you were further working on it, more or less.
We weren't personally arrested. The ship was impounded, which meant that the ship cannot continue with operations. So the customs came along and they sealed the transmitters, they sealed the studios and the record library, so we couldn't make any work with this equipment. We had to stay on board the ship. We weren't allowed to move around outside the ship. And the police, they have a launch, police launch along the seaward side. There were police cars on the jetty side as well. It was fun. We enjoyed it. It lasted about 7 or 8 days. We were told after 7 days that we should leave Holland quietly. We shouldn't go to the airport. We used a fishing boat from the Hook of Holland to Harwich. It was a private fishing boat which took us back to the UK. As far as the Dutch government were concerned, they wanted no more pirate radio, and they were trying to make us feel unwelcome, And so in Holland, that was the end of it. But anyway, as you know, it later developed in Libya, and it all went very well for us for a period of, 10 years or so. And then one day I had a call from MEBO, from Bollier and Meister, to say that the ship is now finished. We want to dismantle, remove the transmitting equipment and studios, and install them on land, because the ship, it costs too much money, Unfortunately, this didn't develop into anything productive, because the equipment was removed from the ship and damaged. It was left on the sand to rot. So none of the MEBO transmitting equipment is functional. It's all scrap.
But that's what was already in Libya.
In Libya, yeah.
And who was with you on the ship in Rotterdam when you said you were arrested and leaving for Harwich? This was the time where, for example, Rudy, was he with you then? Other English people, or was this the other reconstruction work with Rudy together before leaving the boat to the Mediterranean? Was that a later period?
Well, we were all together. Rudy Cargan was on board, and I must say at this moment I'd like to commemorate the life of Rudy Cargan, because he was our chief engineer on board with the generators and the ship's engines. Rudy came from, lived near Düsseldorf. I forget the name of the village now. Gossenbruch, that's right. And Rudy was a very close friend of mine. Rudy didn't speak English, and I didn't speak German. But we had a hybrid language. We made a language out of English, German and Dutch, and it was very funny. We had some fantastic expressions. One of his favourites was "Zum Kuckuck nach einmal." Whatever that means, I don't know. Or "Alles is puffed in the Luft." He was a wonderful man, and I visited him once or twice in Düsseldorf. And every year, on New Year's Day, I would call Rudy, or Rudy would call me, to wish me Happy New Year. And I spoke to his wife, Ria, and later on his children as well. And I was very sad when he passed away this year in February, March, I believe it was. So I would like today to remember the life and the work of Rudy Cargan, a wonderful man. So also, Joop and the Dutch crew were with us on the ship when we were impounded. That really broke up the family, as it were. It was the end of the family. When we restarted well, it wasn't Radio Nordsee, it was the ship to Libya. When we restarted the operation again, we brought in crew from Yugoslavia. They were also very nice people. A little crazy, but they were nice people. We had lots of fun. We sailed the ship from Rotterdam, Slikkerveer, down to Tripoli, not without events. When we arrived at the Bay of Biscay, very rough sea, the MEBO I came alongside the MEBO II, and unfortunately the sea was too rough and the two ships collided and there was some big damage to the ships. So we had to sail into Brest in the south, not south of France, it's northern France, Brest, isn't it?
Brest is
northern France. We sailed into the harbour there, and the French authorities were, what is this big antenna, you know? This is something crazy, you know? So again, we felt that we were arrested. We weren't arrested, but there were some diplomatic communications between Switzerland and the French authorities that we weren't intending to transmit off the French coast. We were on our way on voyage to the North African coast. And on the way we stopped at Morocco, and we wanted some exotic food and gifts from Morocco. So we gave them our records from the record library and we imported from Morocco some wonderful food and some gifts and so on. And then we stopped at Tunisia and we more or less did the same thing. And eventually we arrived at Tripoli, expecting a big reception from Colonel Darby. We waited in rough seas off Tripoli for 14 days before anybody arrived. And when they arrived, finally, there was a small boat and a few officials from the Libyan government. The only thing they were interested in was if we had any alcohol on board. So we said, yes, actually, we have a room full of alcohol. So they removed all the alcohol from the bondage stores, and they sailed away on this small ship piled up with alcohol. And it was another maybe week or 10 days before we had any more reception from the Libyan government. They told us to move into the harbour and tie up alongside the harbour, and then switch our transmitter on so they could hear the equipment's working, you know. And I said to them, this is not a good idea, because if we transmit with 100 kilowatts or even 50 kilowatts, we will cause a lot of interference to the maritime communications. Well, they insisted, you must turn the transmitters on. Anyway, the first thing that happened was that we wiped out the Arab voice transmission. They were broadcasting the Holy Quran, and all the people could hear was the rock and roll music from the ship, you know. And the reason for this was that we had a very high intense signal, and the electrical cables in the studio were acting like an antenna and rebroadcasting the rock and roll music from the ship. Well, that was the first thing. The second thing that happened was the army had a base next to the harbour, and they had their clothes hanging from the line to dry. You know, they wash their clothes, they hang them on the line. But the electrical energy from the transmitter caused a very big current to flow in, and their clothing was on fire. Now the next thing that happened was the best story altogether. They realized then that the power was too high. Please reduce the power. So we used only 10 kilowatts. And a ship was disembarking some grain, some supplies from some country in the harbour, and the crane was using a hook to take the bags of grain from the ship, I think rice or something. And as the jib from the crane, the hook, it went to the bottom of the ship, a huge spark, like a big flame came out, and the whole ship became a loudspeaker. But we were transmitting the Holy Quran, you see. So the ship started to play the sounds of the verses from the Holy Quran. And so the crew of the ship were very afraid that Allah was angry, you know. So they stopped their work. They stopped their work and they went on strike. And this is a true story. So we caused many problems for the Libyan authorities. But we told them in the beginning that it was not good to transmit from the ship inside the harbour. We must be offshore, maybe 1 or 2 kilometers, you know. But they didn't listen, and but anyway, even today they remember these stories. And when I see the officials from the Libyan broadcasting, they recall these stories and laugh. You know, it was so much fun, so much fun.
So you had already a stamp from Israel in your passport at that time? Because
well,
you were on the Voice of Peace before. What is a problem, or
no,
how many passports you used to have?
You have 2 passports, you see. One hot one and one cold one. Like taps, you know. So I would use 2, but it's very important to take the correct passport with you, because if you arrive with the wrong passport, then you have big problems. And we had this situation because we had an engineer from Australia who was working on the Voice of Peace, and we asked him to come to Libya to work with us, and he came with his Israeli passport, you know, or Australian passport with an Israeli stamp in it, and he blacked it out with a black ink, you know. So there was a lot of suspicion about this, really. So we had a few problems, but nothing serious, really, nothing serious.
I quite remember to listen to your broadcast on the shortwave 49 meter. There was for several months or so, there was regularly in the evening very good signal to observe.
Yeah, yeah. It should be. It was a clear channel, and it should have been global, I would imagine. We had a 10 kilowatt transmitter, which was modulated pretty well, 100%. So it should have been heard all over the world. So yeah, we 31 meters, 9.9, I think 9.8 megahertz, and on 49 meters, 6.2 megs. So we had good reception. I'm glad you heard it anyway. I'm glad somebody was listening. I was hoping somebody was listening. Yeah. So we were entertaining ourselves very much, because the Libyans, we didn't know what the purpose of our mission to Libya was at all. It turned out that the main function was to block Radio Cairo, because there was some political problems between Libya and Egypt at the time. And the Maltese broadcasting station on the island of Malta was broadcasting propaganda for Colonel Gaddafi and propaganda for the Egyptians. And our task was to jam the transmissions from Radio Cairo. It wasn't very effective because Radio Cairo has 2 megawatts on medium wave, and we only had 100 kilowatts, so obviously we didn't do much damage, you know. But we played a lot of rock and roll, Beatles, Stones, that kind of stuff, which entertained us. We had a wonderful time, but we didn't have to work too hard, I must admit.
So then finally this transmitter equipment was lost in the dump box.
Yes, it was. The ship was used as target practice by the military and blown up offshore. I wasn't there at the time. It seemed a terrible waste. The real reason was that the cost of maintaining the ship, they had no dry dock in Libya. It had to be sent to Malta for the repainting and repairs. And every 6 months our ship went to Malta for checking. And the bill was so high that the Libyans decided it was just too expensive. And now they regret it, because they had an operating radio station that was mobile. They could move anywhere along the Libyan coast. And they regret having destroyed it.
Okay, in the 70s, you were on the air as a DJ on Radio North Sea and on Caroline also, on both.
Yeah, that's right.
I think we have a little extract, a little jingle to play, which featured you. And
Really?
we have also a strange, we have also a little extract of a production that for the fun of yourself you produced when you were with the ship in Rotterdam and trying to work with the studio equipment there. Maybe you have a short listen if it's possible.
On the hour, every hour, Radio Scheissenhausen with the news. And Johnny, good evening to you. First of all, we have news from Germany. And in Düsseldorf today, members of the Kargen International Luft Corporation met at the Zum Kuckuck Normal in the city centre. The object of the meeting was to iron out Luft problems around the world. Pardon. The meeting was later adjourned due to a strong Puft in the Luft outburst. I beg your pardon. Switzerland. Explorers to the famous Swiss Alps were harassed by falling snow earlier today. A team of 40 explorers from all parts of the globe met at the Hotel Ouder Bloody Fuck to discuss their future plans. The leader of the exploration party, Mr. Bruno Brandenburger, announced at a press conference this afternoon that although conditions were normally favourable, today was definitely niet normaal. In Holland, Angry demonstrators rallied around The Hague's Plaats onderweg earlier today, protesting against the foul condition of the soep van de dag, served up at the Van Fleet Cantina at Slikkerveer, near Rotterdam. The management of the cantina agreed to improve their food by enhancing the taste of their soep van de dag. And that was Radio Scheissenhausen with the news. Next news on the hour, Radio Scheissenhausen. And here we are with the weather forecast before we finally say goodbye. On the Scheissenhausen weather front, high temperatures of around 70 degrees centigrade can be expected, causing a terrible stinking of shite.
Nothing to do with me at all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for coming over.